In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to a special edition of the X's and Argos podcast brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name is Ben Grant, and joining me this week, special guest co-host, I've got author Paul Woods, author of Year of the Rocket. Paul, thank you so much for joining me and making this possible. I'm really excited about this.
Oh, Ben, I'm excited too. Thank you. I mean, I think you do a great job with the podcast. To be called your co-host is an honor. Trust me.
Well, I appreciate that. And, you know, I want to spend some time today for sure talking about your book, Year of the Rocket. I'm really excited about it. I loved your first book, Bouncing Back, and we'll talk about that a little bit too, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
But why don't we start off by just kind of doing a state of things at the moment, because we're basically at the halfway point in the season. The Argos sometimes have looked great, sometimes have struggled. I would love to hear your thoughts on where the team is right now. Like, how do you feel when you look out onto that football field? Are you optimistic? Are you nervous? Where are you right now?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. I'm bullish on the team. I think they're frankly, to be 4-3 at this point after the schedule they've had is great. 4 of the first 7 were on the road. They played the Bombers twice. They played the Tiger Cats twice. They played the Stampeders when we thought the Stampeders were going to be a dominant team. They haven't had a chance to play the weak sisters, the Ottawa Rough Riders. I'm dating myself, the Ottawa Red Blacks. I'm very and I think that we've seen an enormous amount of depth on the team. I mean, they've obviously had tons and tons of injuries in pretty well every position. And I love what I'm seeing from the guys that have stepped in for the most part. I mean, I've got some areas where I think they need some improvement, and I'm glad to talk about that. But I'm really impressed with the Canadian depth. I think their last 2 drafts have been unbelievable. I think I heard that they've played 10 Canadian rookies already in the first 7 games, which is just about unheard of. I mean, that's 2 draft classes that have basically been already on the roster, and guys are contributing. Some guys are contributing incredibly well. I mean, Peter Nicastro is a starter at center, and he's going to be a starter for a long time. They've got Brissett has contributed at receiver. And they've got guys that were drafted a couple of years ago, like Shane Richards, I think has been a revelation at the left guard spot since Blake went down and Nicastro moved over. I'm very impressed with the depth and also the international depth, the American players. I mean, they've had so many injuries on the defensive line, it's ridiculous. I mean, the guys that we thought would play, Shane Ray, Coney Ely, Cordero Law, we barely seen them. They've had injuries at the back end. They lost Robertson Daniel after week 1. They've lost other guys back there. Now we're playing without 2 starting national linebackers. So I am super pumped about the team. It's pretty clear now that we've been through 7 games that Hamilton is better than they looked at first. I mean, they looked pretty awful in the first 2 weeks. And I thought, great, good. It's going to be easy to get through the East. I don't think it's going to be easy to get through the East because Hamilton's defense is really tough. Although, I don't want to overstate that because the league has become so defensive oriented that almost everybody's defense looks good to some extent. I think we can beat Hamilton. I think we can beat Montreal. I think we can come out of the East. If we get everybody healthy, we're going to have loads of more people than we can use. I'm very interested to see what Chris Jones decides to do personnel-wise and scheme-wise. I'm sure that what we saw the other night was only a taste of it. In fact, I think it was almost a weird hybrid. I mean, it was him and Stubler kind of teaming up. And my sense was that really wasn't a Chris Jones called game. But I was very impressed with the way he dialed up pressure on that one play that led to the Richardson interception. It was the one time I really noticed a heavy blitz. I think they ran rush 6 guys on that play. You would know because you follow that stuff even closer than I do, Ben. But I thought, man, there's pressure coming. And then sure enough, he got the pick, right? So I want to see, I'm sure Jones is spending a lot of time this week looking at film and figuring out personnel. And I think a few guys might end up being gone. on. I mean, I don't think we're going to keep everybody that's there right now if once guys get healthy. But I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do when we get everybody going in his scheme. I like the two running backs a lot. I like the fact that we're using two running backs quite often. That's so unusual. We haven't seen that in this market. Oh my God. Like, I don't even remember the last time we had an actual two-back set. It's way before Milanovic and Trestman. It was just like unheard of to think that you'd use two international running backs at the same time. And they're using them in creative, clever ways. They're doing gadget plays. They're pushing the ball downfield. As you know, from reading me online, I like McLeod Bethel-Thompson a whole lot. I was impressed, and I am impressed with Art Buckle. I mean, he's done some frustrating things. He's dropping the ball way too much. He's not protecting the ball either in the air or in his hands as well as he needs to be. But he's clearly got a lot of potential, and he's already sort of realizing some of that potential. I think McLeod Bethel-Thompson, I was not at all surprised he played so well the other night or against Calgary in week 1. I believe the guy is ready to be a starting quarterback. We'll see what they end up doing. I mean, I think we're going to see both guys at times throughout the rest of the season. Who ends up being the starter, assuming we get into the playoffs, and I think that's a pretty safe bet. We'll see. But I like everything about this team, basically, other than the fact that they've done stupid penalties and stupid mistakes at inopportune times. They've made, I mean, of the 4 wins, 3 of them were arguably made way harder than they needed to be. We should have beaten Winnipeg by 20 points. We should have beaten Hamilton by more than a point. We should have beaten Montreal by more than 3 points. We let those teams back off the mat. So I like to think that means we're learning how to be better, so that when those games happen in the second half of the season, we aren't going to take our foot off the throat, and we'll start winning games by bigger. Sorry, that was a long answer, but there you go.
No, that's great. And just to comment on a few things that you said there too. So, well, the Chris Jones blitz that you talked about, I think that was the only, super pressure of the game, the only dog blitz that he sent. It was cover 0. Charleston Hughes ended up actually backing out of that. He was supposed to rush, but he saw that he wasn't going to get through. He backed out a little bit. Wow. That created a weird space issue, and that kind of allowed Shaq to break off his guy, and that led to the pick.
That's where I love hearing what you have to say, because you see things. You've got a coach's mindset, which I don't have, and so I would not have picked up on that. I just saw, man, there's guys coming from every angle here, and then the next thing you know, I'm cheering because there's an interception in our hands, right? So thank you for that, and for continue to share those kinds of insights, because I love them.
I appreciate you saying that, although I can't take credit for that one. I actually didn't see it either. Shaq Richardson's the one that shared that with me, because I asked him post-game. And usually I am pretty good at picking up on that stuff, but I couldn't read the coverage on that. I knew we were sending heat, but I asked him after the game, I'm like, Shaq, what coverage were you in? And he explained that to me. And then when I went back to rewatch, I was on it, but I got to give credit to Shaq Richardson.
Well, what a thought process from Hughes, though, to determine that I'm not getting through and to drop in. Like, that's a veteran's mindset. And I got to assume Jones knows what Hughes is all about, and vice versa. I don't know if Jones. I don't think Jones was in Calgary when Richardson was there, so I'm guessing they're new to each other. But I like the idea of having Hughes. I think we're going to see a better Hughes the second half. Not that he was terrible. He wasn't. He obviously is not making a lot of sacks. But I think with his experience and knowledge and what I assume is quite a bit of empathic knowledge between him and Jones, I think we're going to see more of that sort of stuff, and that's fascinating to hear that he did that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's just a really veteran move to know that, okay, I've got my guy to commit already to blocking me, but I can't get there. I can be helped here, and little things like that. You never hear about that kind of stuff, and so it was really cool to see. And I think Chris Jones probably knows most of these guys pretty well, even the ones he hasn't coached, because I think that he's spent enough time around the league. Like he knows the CFL inside and out. He was a wonderful CFL coach. Most of these guys that we're talking about aren't brand new players, so he's familiar with a lot of the veterans.
Even though he's been gone for a couple of years, we've got a lot of guys that have been in the league for 4 or 5 years. So he's seen guys like Edwards play, and he's seen guys of a whole pile of the guys on the back, and he's seen them before. He's obviously seen Mwamba and Judge. I guess he coached Mwamba, I believe, in Saskatchewan. He coached McCoyle in Edmonton. So, he knows what he's dealing with. And now I think it's just a case of how can he kind of move the chess pieces around the board in the right way. And I'm looking forward to seeing a pressure type defense. I've always loved those. The league's gone away from that, I think, in recent years. The sort of the bend but don't break, which is kind of the Rich Stubler style. And I don't love that style of defense. I hope Jones. I don't want pressure in every single play because you can overcome that as an offense. But you bring it in at the right time in an unpredictable ways, you can do a lot of havoc on offenses.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that just occurred to me, I hadn't really thought about this until you were going through some of the injuries that we've had in different positional groups. The running backs are basically the only positional group that hasn't been injured, and that's usually the first guy to go. Yeah. Like it's such a volatile position in terms of injury risk, and those unfortunately running back careers are really short because it's such a toll that is taken on their body, and yet the running backs, knocking on wood here, have managed to stay healthy, fullback and running back. And so maybe it's because of the platooning of the two backs there. But that's been a stroke of luck.
Yeah,
however,
that's
we know
true. Although
depth.
I think when they moved Foster into the lineup, don't forget AJ Ouellette had played a couple of games, and they described him as having gotten a bit dinged up. But really, I think that was probably more they needed to get Foster into the lineup, and clearly we've seen why. I mean, he had 2 plays last Friday in the fourth quarter when he was going backwards. He lost 18 yards on 2 carries, which drove me nuts. But he's a great player, and they can use him in so many ways. He's one of these Swiss Army knives that you can run him, you can go sideways, you can go up the middle, you can get him out in space on a defensive back. You're right. White's been a revelation. I mean, I didn't really know if he had much left in the tank. Been around the league for a few years, and running backs, as you know, don't tend to last that long. But he's been really good. I mean, he rips open a few 8-yard gains every game. It feels like, often on first down when you really want to get a big gain. Let's keep those guys healthy for sure, because I don't know that there's much else behind them. I think they've got one running back on the practice roster, but I would hate to lose either guy.
Yeah, agreed. And they've both been fantastic. And I think they both got that great burst off the line. They're very different backs in some ways, and yet the things they have in common, they're great in pass protection. They have that sort of 4-yard explosiveness. Usually, whenever there's a handoff, I have to do a quick double check just to see, wait a second, who's that with the ball?
Yeah,
because they have that same first step. Yeah. And, it's not every day that you find a running back like that. And especially that have all those other intangibles too. So,
and one of the things that I look for sitting behind the bench in 124 is, to see the way players interact with each other. And I love watching that. And I've seen a few times where it's clear those two guys have a lot of liking and respect for each other. And they could be rivals, right? I mean, they could be thinking, you're taking my carries. And I don't see that at all. I think White in particular seems to have embraced Foster as, wow, I got this other weapon. It's just going to open things up for me and for Rogers and for Daniels and all those guys, right? So you want that kind of mentality on your team. And I think we've got that. One thing I am really impressed with is the body language of the players. I mean, we've been through 2 pretty bad years, right? The last 2 years were awful. And there were guys that seemed to be checked out. The one thing that drove me crazy was way back, we had a couple of sort of draft choices at the offensive line. Mason Woods was one of them, and just never seemed to even be remotely part of the team. But I like looking at Churchill and Giffen, like when the defense is on the field, those guys are whipping up the crowd. Like it's really good to see all that stuff.
The camaraderie is excellent. It's something I noticed right away in training camp, and it's something that I haven't really seen before, not to this level, certainly, where anytime there was a break, there was a veteran player talking usually to a younger player and trying to coach them up, trying to work on something. When practice would end, almost nobody would leave because everyone else wanted to, they wanted to stay, they wanted to pick brains, people wanted to help out a little bit. And like you're saying with White and Foster, that's true with pretty much every positional group. You've got a veteran guy who in some teams might feel threatened by the younger guy coming up. And in this case, that's really not what's going on. They're trying to make the whole team better. And so you get guys like Sam Machimpong, who's learning from this great wealth of knowledge that they have in these American defensive linemen. And you've got some of the CFL rookies like Jamal Peters, like Tristan Deku, who are able to pick the brain of Shaq Richardson, and he's so happy to help them with it. And Jeff Richards, and they're passing on what they know and trying to do whatever they can to make sure that this team makes it all the way. So that kind of stuff is great. But I also have to give some credit to the coaching staff, because in the example, I think maybe White and Foster is the easiest one to look at. But after that big breakout game that DJ Foster had, I think, maybe White was thinking to himself, what's going to happen here? Is this going to be his job now?
Yeah, right.
And good on the coaches for going right back out with White and saying, no, Foster's great and we're going to use him. But, you're the guy.
You're still starting. You're on the first series. Yeah, that's right. A couple of things there to just pick up on your comments. Ashampong's been a revelation. The guy has been really strong. I'm so happy with his development, because we obviously needed it when Mulumba and Judge went down. He had to play almost every snap last week. I think I saw he sat a little bit in the second quarter and the fourth quarter when they had Robbie Smith in there and Hendricks. But for the most part, it was the main four guys played most of the game. And he's been very, very good. The other thing on the coaching, I do want to say one thing. I mean, I actually really like Ryan Dinwiddie a lot. I think he's got all of the makeup to be a long-term successful head coach in this league. I love his confidence. I love his attitude. He's got to get a little bit more conservative at certain times, man. They've thrown the ball in the fourth quarter with leads to protect. And I think you're just burn the clock. We got White, we got Foster, man. Like, why are we throwing the ball? I'd rather we got a great punter, hand the ball to White, let him gain 4 or 5 yards and then let Beatty kick it downfield. Don't be throwing the ball and getting an incomplete pass and stopping the clock. Right. So that's my one complaint about Dinwiddie, is that I think he's maybe a little too aggressive at times, but that's compared to what we've had where guys were never aggressive at all. I'll take it.
Yeah, I'll take aggressive over passive. I think you're right, though. There needs to be a balance. And I think part of that is working with, we're maybe thinking of the end of that Hamilton game specifically, but I like taking chances. I like that he had faith in his quarterback to make the throw, but that's a situation where he's got to be sure his young quarterback knows I can't just throw the ball up, because even in that situation, that interception, that horrible interception against Hamilton, the throwaway is also no good. You want to take the sack because that keeps the clock ticking.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. And, to be fair to Dinwiddie, we threw the ball with 14 seconds left or something in the first half through a deep corner route, led to a touchdown. Like that's the kind of thing we would have never seen under Trestman or Chamberlain or even under Milanovic, right? They just wouldn't have tried that. So that was the game changer. That touchdown, I think it made it 21-10 instead of 14-10. Huge momentum swing right there on that ballsy, gutsy play. So gotta love that. And the fact that we've got a quarterback that could lay the ball in there like that, and we've really probably got two, although I think we want to see a little bit more from Arbuckle in terms of his deeper throws. He's clearly got a good arm. He's got to kind of get it in check properly. But that was a great throw that McLeod Bethel-Thompson threw, and that was a Ricky Ray type pass.
Yeah, and I thought his deep arm was coming along a little bit in that Saskatchewan game. I thought there were some really nice throws he made, especially on the run, rolling out left, rolling out right, and he was able to hook up with deep targets. But McLeod looked so good last game, going downfield to some of those speedsters. I kind of wish, and I don't believe in platooning quarterbacks. That's not something that I think works, but I kind of wish there was a way, like if this were a video game and you could have all three guys, because how good was Pipkin in those short yardage situations last game?
Honestly, I would not be upset if they dressed Pipkin as a third man. They dressed an international linebacker, Cleat, the other day, and he only saw special teams duty. I'm not minimizing special teams duty. It's obviously very important, and we've had struggles at times on special teams this year. But I would like to think that you could coach up somebody among your nationals or your globals to do whatever he was doing on kick coverage. And if they had Pipkin as a third guy, he could become your short yardage guy. And then maybe, Hamilton did it a few years ago where they ran. I think it was when Caleros, I may be wrong on the memory on this, but I'm trying to remember, was it when Caleros was still there, but they would put Masoli in for certain packages during the game. And then eventually Masoli became the starter. I think that's what it was. But so you're right, you can't rotate the guys. It's not like Joe Theismann and Greg Barton. Every series they take turns. And you can't predict who's going to get hot or who's going to get hurt. So you don't know for sure that you're going to be able to use both guys the way the Argos kind of used Holloway and Barnes way back in the 40 years ago. But I would like to see both guys playing, and I would definitely like to see Pipkin in for some packages as well. He brings a whole different dimension as a guy who can run. We saw he looked like he could have really broken free on one of his carries last week. He was sort of one tackle away from busting a longer one. So, man, I wouldn't mind seeing the third guy dressed and instead of a third string linebacker, which is basically what they have, right?
Yeah, it's a tough call, but I'm starting to agree with you because I think, whoever you start, whether it's Arbuckle or McLeod Bethel-Thompson, I think if either one of those guys gets injured, the other one of the two has to go in. Yeah. But like you say, there's got to be some value in having Pipkin on the dress roster because it's so exciting to watch, and it just gives an opposing defense that much more to prep for. The more work you give for the opposing defensive coordinator, the more watered down their defense is going to be. Whether it's they're preparing for no huddle or they're preparing for packages, give it to them. Well,
and I give credit to Dinwiddie for that as well, because it's not only like they had to dress Pipkin because Arbuckle wasn't able to play, but he did use him. He used him not just as a replacement for McLeod when McLeod got dinged up. He actually he got back in there a few more times. It wasn't just short yardage. So it was pretty clear he was going to give this guy some meaningful reps. And I'm sure McLeod was good with that. In fact, I think he said some pretty strong words of praise for Pipkin. So that's the kind of thing you need happening, right? You need to get everybody on the team to realize we're all in this. And I actually think that's one thing that makes McLeod a really great leader, is that I don't think he minds if he ends up being the backup, knowing that I'm going to be called on at some point, and when I go in, I'm going to be someone they can rely on. I think he's got the right mentality at this point after, 9 or 10 years of kicking around the pros and, being third string or roster or practice roster. And now he finally gets a job. And he might have thought, hey, after leading the league in touchdown passes, I deserve to be the starter. But he took less money than Arbuckle, as far as I know. He signed, he obviously tried the spring league and he did some other things too. But, I think the guy is almost like Joe Barnes in the sense that he's quite happy to subordinate himself and let the other guy star, knowing that I'm ready when you need me and I will support you in any way I can. I feel like that's the guy's mentality. I'm so glad we've got all three of them. I'm really glad we've got McLeod Bethel-Thompson as a backup, because I think he's a fantastic backup who could be a starter, or certainly on one or two of the other teams. Ottawa, obviously, he'd be miles beyond what they've got. And Pipkin, we got three experienced quarterbacks. There's nobody else in the league that's got that. Well, I guess Watford, but Watford's not got the experience that Pipkin has. So we're good. If we get into some injuries, we can keep going.
I love you described the sort of Zen attitude that McLeod Bethel-Thompson has. He talked about that very openly after last game, because I think he wanted to make clear that it is a really good relationship in that quarterback room, because of course media, it's something that there's maybe blood in the water, people looking for a story. Is there a quarterback controversy? People love talking about that, writing about that, and he wanted to get out there right away and say, look, we all get along wonderfully, and they really do, and you see that at practice the same way I described it with other positional groups. And he had so much praise. He talked about trying to be one of the first people in the room to watch film, and there's no chance because Arbuckle's going to be in there at 5 o'clock in the morning. I think he said Arbuckle was a freaking scientist, were the words he used, and the way that he dissects film and is going through stuff, and they love challenging each other, but in a friendly way. There's just a lot of camaraderie there, and it's so wonderful to see. Now it's better when you're winning. Almost anything seems cool, I guess. But sure. But I love that chemistry, because quarterback rooms aren't always like that, and I think most of the time they're not like this at all, and especially when you've got three guys we're talking about. Yeah. So no, I love watching them. All right, last thing before we move on to some other stuff, Paul, who would you put out there, assuming everyone's healthy after the bye? Let's say Arbuckle's 100%. Who do you walk out there against Ottawa?
Well, You're not going to be surprised to hear me say, Ben, I would go with McLeod Bethel-Thompson. I felt from the beginning that he is the guy that's most ready this year. I mean, we want to keep Arbuckle for sure. He's 4.5 years younger than Bethel-Thompson. He's got an unbelievable upside, and you can't sort of, make him feel like he's not got a future here. But I also don't want to give him the job based on the idea that, well, this is going to be our man for the future, so let's give him the job now, because he's only on a 1-year contract. And we know Ottawa is going to be looking for quarterbacks in the off seasons. And, he was there for the season that wasn't. Could they bring him back? They could try. No, there's a few other free agents coming to be as well. I think Masoli is also on a 1-year deal in Hamilton, and there may be a few others. But I like Bethel-Thompson. I mean, he's the guy who hasn't thrown an interception. He hasn't fumbled this year, I don't believe. I also honestly I think Arbuckle has not been healthy from the beginning. Like, the one thing I've been surprised by is that he almost never run the ball. And you've mentioned him like sort of throwing on the run, and he did look a little better in that game against Saskatchewan, where he was kind of scrambling one side or the other and throwing off it. But I wonder if his hammy or whatever it is that he's got is actually worse than we realize. And you're going against Ottawa, so like it's not like you have to really. You don't ever take a game for granted, obviously, but you got to figure we're going into that game as heavy favorites at home. Ottawa is going to be playing possibly, two kids that have never played, or even, a third kid who's never played in this league before. It wouldn't hurt to give Arbuckle an extra week or two to heal. And, what's the harm in that? I guess there's the risk. There always is the risk of a quarterback controversy. And even though we don't have a lot of media following the team every day and asking tough questions, it'll get mentioned on TSN and it'll get into Frank Ziccarelli's column or whatever. And I don't want that. I don't want anything that's going to kind of damage what I think is very, very good chemistry in the room. But I don't see a lot of downside against Ottawa. I just say, okay, McLeod, take another week. Nick, take another week to get healthy, and then the schedule gets harder after that, right? So that's what I would do.
I almost wonder if you can approach it the way that you approach game planning for an opponent, where you look at a defense's skill set and you look and say, okay, what does Ottawa do well? Maybe Ottawa's a bad example. Let's pick a team that does something well.
Yeah.
So maybe take a look at Montreal or something. You say, okay, well, what do they do well? What do they struggle with? Well, we've got a quarterback in Arbuckle who's great at RPOs. He's great at those quick passes. He's pretty swift on his feet. He's great at reading complex coverages. And so if that's what this game calls for, we use Arbuckle. If you got a team that really struggles downfield, they don't, they tend to play a lot of the same coverage. They show a lot of man, especially.
Right,
McLeod's great with that.
Right.
Then that's the guy where you go with. I'm glad it's not me making that call, because it's unconventional. And if it doesn't work, you're going to get blasted for it. But I wonder.
Well, it's very interesting, and maybe that Dinwiddie's done some unconventional things already. Maybe that's another way for him to look at it. He certainly seems to be saying. You think he said, like, I'm glad we've got 2 number 1 quarterbacks, and it could very well be that he's thinking exactly along those lines, like situational usage based on the opponent, based on the situation in the game, and so on. And it could work. I mean, it would be really cool. A lot of fans would be startled, but a lot of them would be pretty happy as well, because fans are always asking for the backup quarterback, or why can't we go back to the 2 quarterback system like Holloway and Barnes? Well, it goes against the modern conventional thinking, but you know what? Dinwiddie's a young up-and-coming coach, and maybe some of the ways that he's going to look at things are not going to be the ways traditional coaches look at things. I think that's a really intriguing idea. If you want a game plan where you're going to go a lot of deep corners or deep posts or something against single coverage, maybe McLeod Bethel-Thompson is the guy. If it's going to be a game plan where you've got to maybe have more running action and more RPOs and so on, maybe it's Arbuckle. Could you sell those guys on that? I think you could. I mean, you could definitely sell Bethel-Thompson on it. Whether Arbuckle would feel like, man, every game I'm sitting, I'm not accumulating stats for my next contract. I don't know. I'd like to think he doesn't look at things that way, but who knows, right?
Yeah, exactly. And but I do think if there is a room that's going to buy into it, I think it's this quarterback room. Well, you're talking about Holloway, and I want to transition into talking about your books, and I want to actually start with Bouncing Back just for a second, because Paul, I love this book, and there's a few reasons why. First of all, it brought me back to my childhood. My first Argo memories are Conrad Holloway. He was the first athlete I idolized as a kid. So I didn't really tune into the Argos until he arrived. And I guess I think it was actually, I'm not sure if it was 81 or 82 where I sort of started tuning in. In my memories, I was too young to really know exactly where in my life I was, but I do remember that 83 season pretty vividly, and that's where things really started to come to life for me. What I loved about reading this book is that it's such a difficult story to tell. Either one of these stories, because there's so many people involved, and I know trying to keep track. Usually, you're following a story like this, trying to keep track of names, trying to keep all the loose ends together. I don't know how long exactly it took you to write both of these pieces, but the best thing about this book, aside from the amazing story that it is, there's not a moment that you introduce and then walk away from. Every question that I had was answered at some point. There was never something that you forgot to tie up, that you didn't follow up on. Any name that was brought in, there was a reason for it. It was going somewhere, and you saw us through to the end of that story. And it just made this thing come to life for me again. So I'm going to say this with both books, I'm going to absolutely say, if you are watching this right now, then you're certainly enough of an Argos fan that you have no business not owning both of these books. So you got to find a way to get both of these books in your collection. And this one is especially easy to find right now. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But this absolute joy reading this, Paul. So before we talk about Year of the Rocket, I just want to say again, thank you for all the work you put into this. I know it must have taken ages, but yeah, an amazing read for an Argos fan. So
well, thank you, Ben. That's very kind of you to say that. And I mean, I'm obviously very happy and proud of Bouncing Back. And the funny thing is, it took a lot less time. It took way less time than Year of the Rocket. It took me from conception to publication. I think Bouncing Back took 14 months, which is just ridiculous. Like, it's so fast. It was, I mean, and as great of a story as it was, and there's a lot of threads to that story, as you know from having read it, it wasn't as big and sweeping as Year of the Rocket is. And I also was just kind of, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I just motored. Like I interviewed less than half as many. I think I interviewed about 45 or 48 people for Bouncing Back, and it was more than 100 for the other one. And I had a lot more like printed and visual and video research material for Year of the Rocket than I did for Bouncing Back. So there was more to kind of pour over. That's why this one took like 4.5 years. But yeah, I mean, I started writing that book in, I think it was May of 2012. And I knew that the 30th anniversary of 83 was going to be the following year. I said, okay, I got to get this thing ready for the start of the next season, which is basically 14 months from now. As it turned out, I ended up writing the bulk of it in about, I think it was like 2 big, really intense writing sessions that sort of went on for about 3 or 4 weeks each. Most of the book was written in those two chunks of time. It's funny, I didn't really figure out my writing style exactly at the beginning. And so there's one of the things I'm not super happy about Bouncing Back is that I feel like the writing is a bit inconsistent, in the sense that even though I think every chapter is good in its own way, I think I sort of found my voice a little bit more towards the last 7 or 8 chapters that I wrote, which are mostly the last 7 or 8 chapters of the book. I wrote it pretty close to chronologically. And so when I read it, and when I go back and look at it now, I go, yeah, the first few chapters, I was still, one of the things that you may have caught from this is that there's a lot of segments in the book where I will run like 4 or 5 quotes just separated by boldface, like Paul Pearson, and then what did he say? Terry Greer, what did he say? Without me sort of writing anything at all. And the reason for that is that I originally was going to do it as an oral history. It was going to be, the whole book was going to be written in the words of those who were there and who did it. And that was my initial vision. And it was only after I started working with an extremely good editor, Don Gibb, that he said, look, you're part of this. You know the story as well or better than some of these guys, and you lived it. You need need to be part. You need not to make the book about me, but your perspective needs to be captured, and you can do that by how you stitch it together. And so that's what I ended up doing. And so as I got deeper and deeper into it, I was more confident with my own ability to sort of tell the story in the way that I wanted to tell it, and then weave in the quotes and the comments from those that were there and the things that were in the newspapers or on TV or so on. So it's a little bit muddled, I think, in the style, but it does capture a really good story, and I think it captures it in a really good way. And I mean, what's obviously self-serving for me to say, but I agree. Anybody that loves the Argos would find the stories in both books fascinating, because these are two of the most amazing periods in Argo history, the 81 to 83 period, to go from the worst team we ever had to the first Grey Cup champions in 31 years with many of the same guys. And then 91 obviously was the most magical, electrifying, crazy, spectacular year in the history of the team. I've always said probably not the greatest Argo team of all time. That's probably the 96, 97 Argos with Doug Flutie, who were just motored over everybody. But 91 is a way more fun and exciting year than 96 and 97 were, to me at least. And 91's got some other stuff. 90 was pretty interesting too, with I think the greatest offense in history. 92 had some crazy stuff happening, Rocket stomping on Andy McVeigh's head and so on. So again, it's kind of almost a 4-year story arc, the new book, but the bulk of it is 91, which is for sure the definitive Argo year in history, right? It's been around for, next year it'll be 150 years. There's never been a year like 91. There's never going to be another one like 91. And so that's why I did that book. And it did, as I say, it took me 4.5 years. It was a way bigger project to tackle.
There's a lot of high praise for Year of the Rocket. And one of my favorite lines is Stephen Brunt, who said, if it was fiction, you wouldn't believe it. And it's so true. When you break down the roots of this story, you sort of look at what was 1991 in a nutshell. It doesn't even make any sense. It's such a bizarre, fantastic piece that he's right. You could never sell that idea as a piece of fiction, because it's just so ridiculous. And yet there it was. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't just the backstory and the McNall bits and Gretzky and what a weird trio. And I love John Candy, man. I love John Candy. But the energy itself, and just looking at the Rocket himself, Paul, I was just getting into football at that point. I just started playing, and I got to tell you, I was obsessed with Rocket Ismail. I was a lifelong Michigan Wolverines fan, and yet I watched him at Notre Dame, and I was glued to it. And I would actually watch a Notre Dame game if it was on over a Michigan game because of Rocket, and that was saying a lot. And I wouldn't. And there were some great Michigan. That was a great Michigan team that year too. I think that was that Desmond Howard that year?
Howard was there, and actually, of course, Rocket scored 2 kickoff return touchdowns in one game against the Wolverines. Right,
I remember
88
that.
and 92 yards in the same game, which is just nuts. So he was an electrifying. I say in the book, possibly, and I actually think it's probably true, probably the fastest person ever to play Canadian football. I mean, I get into his 40-yard time on the first day of training camp, and how everybody stayed to watch it. He was the last guy to run. It was the end of the second of 2-a-days, second practice of the day. At the end of the afternoon, everybody's tired and hot, and everybody stayed to watch it. And of course, they only had hand stopwatches timing, not the electronic timing they have now, but the consensus was his time was 4.21. And the NFL has never had a 4.21 time since they introduced electronic timing. And when you watch the highlights of the guy on the field, like his first punt return on the reverse from pinball in that home opener, his burst was unbelievable, and it was like that all year long. I mean, when the guy got into the open field and turned it on, he was just running away from it. He was making a gap against the guys chasing him. Unbelievable speed.
And there are guys that have track speed that can put up a really great time. You look at a guy like John Ross, for example, who, he's blazing fast on a track, but it doesn't always translate onto the field. And Rocket was one of those guys where he may have run faster on the field than he ran in that 4.21 that some people have contested. But Paul, I got to show you something. I went into my basement today to dig these out. So I want to, first of all, I got to preface this by saying I was working as a Toronto Star paper boy at the time. And so my salary was not Terrific. And as a kid, I put all my money, every cent I had, into buying a collection of Rocket Ismail rookie cards. And for those watching on YouTube, you can see these here.
There, man. Yeah.
I wanted 25 of them. So
perfect for the number. Yeah.
What's so funny is trading cards were big at that time for about a 2-year window. So every card I own is worth nothing because that was the wrong era to collect trading cards in. But the guy that I was buying these from, every time he got a new one in the store, I went in and bought it. And he's like, you're going to lose your shirt on all these because they're worth more now than they will ever be. And I said, I know, but it's not about that. I wanted 25 because he was 25. Yeah. And that poster I should, this could look like a prop here. I got to show you all my 25
man,
of these.
You got them all. Yeah, right.
They're all there. But the poster that you have behind you, I had 2 of them in my room, to go along with my Icky Woods and Boomer Esiason and all my Bengal greats. But I had the Rocket up there, and I can't tell you how exciting it was. Well, I can tell you, you know exactly how exciting it was to go and watch a game because you did. But I don't know if I've ever experienced a sporting event that had the electricity of that 2 seconds. The last 2 seconds before he caught a punt or kick return, that when the ball was on its way down from its arc, you could hear the stadium. There was this noise that doesn't happen in any other moment in any sport, this sort of building feeling of adrenaline and excitement. And usually that's something, it's after the event. It's after the crack of the bat at Blue Jays game. It's after the touchdown is thrown. But with the Rocket, it was the anticipation of, oh my God, he's going to get the ball. What's he going to do with it?
Well, that is so interesting. I'd never actually noticed that. I'm gonna go back and watch that because, of course, I've got this YouTube channel now called Year of the Rocket where I'm posting a lot of video from back then, and I have been struck by, as I've been going through it, and there's lots more to come. By the way, for those that are watching the channel, there's going to be lots more to come in the coming weeks. But I've been struck by the roar and the buzz when he gets the ball into his hands. Like it's especially on either a big return or a deep pass pattern or something. It's just like it was louder than anybody else. Like it was just the place just went berserk. And I remember being at that first game, the home opener in '91 with my kids, and when he touched the ball, his first touch was on a pass reception throw from Ricky Foggy, and it was loud. But when he ran that punt return back after Pinball handed him the ball right up the sideline, and then he took off up the right, man, it was just nuts. You'll love this story, by the way. I have to tell you, since you've got those cards, that was great to show those props. I actually cut a chapter out of Year of the Rocket about the card wars between AW and Jago. Jago being a mom and pop type Canadian sports card, football card company that I did a lot of work for over the years. I used to write the backs of the cards, and I got to know John Bradley very well. John's one of the 2 founders, along with Barry Goodman, and I remember talking to him in '91, and he was so excited. We're going to get Rocket. This is the first year we're going to actually produce wax packs and put them in Max Milks and Becker's and all the stores like that. Instead of just being for collectors only, 500 sets, they went mass. And then they couldn't get Rocket because the Argos and Rocket signed an exclusive deal with AW. And I had what I thought was a really interesting chapter about that battle between these two ventures, both of which ultimately failed. I mean, as you said, those cards are worthless. They mass overproduced, and for 2 years, '91 and '92, and the market was flooded with the cards. But it didn't really fit the narrative of the book. It sort of slowed things down. So I'm hoping I'm going to find somebody somewhere to publish the story, because I think it's a hell of a story. I give Jago a lot of credit. They kept producing. They went back to their old ways in '93. We're going to do 500 sets just for diehard collectors. We're going to charge players to have their card in the set instead of give them money like all the other card companies do. And they kept going, right? It's only the last few years that they've sort of gotten out of the business. And so it's a funny little footnote of the whole thing that, Rocket not only drove interest in the Argos and the CFL, but he actually created a little battle for Canadian football card supremacy in a market that had basically cards had almost not existed, right? I think it was '72 when the last O-Pee-Chee set was produced. 72 or 73. And then there was nothing until Jago came along in 81. And then Jago was this tiny little company doing like 500 sets a year for just hardcore collectors, no mass marketing whatsoever. And then all of a sudden, 91, you can go into every 7-Eleven and there's cards on sale, all because of Rocket, basically.
I think I have one of the AWs somewhere with him wearing the white jersey and I think it's white jersey, white pants. I think he's got that one.
Which they never wore, but he went down for a photo shoot before the season, and Danny Webb was worried he wasn't going to bring the jersey back, right? So there's a lot of stories like that. Some of them didn't get into the book, but it was a crazy year. So many crazy things happened. As you say, like Brent's right. If you tried to sell a Hollywood script writer on this, they go, "What? Come on, really? Like you're going to outbid the NFL? You're going to pay more money than anybody's ever paid any football player ever. You're going to have two of the biggest stars the country's ever produced owning the team. You're going to have the coldest Grey Cup of all time, and the quarterback's going to lead you to victory despite having a broken collarbone. Come on, like that's not happening, right? A guy's going to throw a frozen can of beer and almost hit the Rocket as he scores the winning touchdown. Yeah, crazy.
It is. And what's so interesting to me, though, is how we've never seen anything like it since, and we may not again, but like, why haven't there been celebrity owners? Why hasn't something, maybe not to this extent, but why haven't we seen something like that again, where a celebrity because it's not like you need to be a trillionaire like you do in the NFL to come in and really make an impression. I know, the salary cap kind of changes things a little bit, but does it really? I don't know. There were cap issues and things like that back then.
Well, I think part of the reason for that probably is that celebrity ownership would probably work only in big celebrity type market like Toronto. I mean, arguably, maybe it could work in Vancouver, maybe it could work in Montreal, but really Toronto is kind of the most celebrity conscious city. And I think what's happened is that, the celebrities have anybody that's thought of it have probably seen like it didn't work for McNall, Gretzky and Candy. Like, why would it work for me? Interesting. There's an interesting comment in the book from John Tory, the mayor of Toronto, who back in the early 90s was the CFL's legal counsel, and later he was chairman of the board of governors, and I think he was acting commissioner for a few years a bit later. But Tory was there for all of the McNall, Gretzky, Candy period, and had some very interesting things to say about it. And one thing we talked about was the fact that when McNall's financial empire turned out, well, when we all started finding out, when the wall started closing in on him, that it was all built on defrauding investors and bankers, and he had to get out of owning the Argos. It was one of the things he had to jettison properties, and so we put the team up for sale. But it was done quietly. He told Brian Cooper, who was his chief operating officer and executive vice president, find a buyer, but don't tell John we're selling. And I couldn't get McNall to tell me exactly why he'd said that, but I think it was probably he was maybe ashamed. He didn't want John to know how much his whole thing was fake and built on fraud. So Candy didn't find out until very late in the process, and too late to really stop it or to like put together his own ownership group. Although he wanted to, for a brief time, he toyed with, let's find somebody else to I'll buy it. Let's get somebody else, and I'll keep owning it. And then he had to reluctantly sort of concede that no, I'm not going to do it. And then sadly, like a couple of weeks later, he died. But there's a really interesting quote from John Tory where he says, like, John Candy was a wealthy man, was a wealthy actor, but he couldn't have afforded to lose $5 million a year. And that's probably what they would have been facing. And the Argos probably have been losing that money at that scale for most of the years in the last 30. So could any celebrity sustain that long term? I suppose, yeah, sure. If Jeff Bezos wanted to buy the Argos, it would be pocket change to him. But you're not going to find, like, why would Drake want to do it? Drake wouldn't want to be associated with a brand that is not perceived as being a hip happening thing. So that's probably why it hasn't happened. It's not financially viable in Toronto. I'm not sure if it ever will be. I hope it will be. I still keep clinging to the idea that we can rebuild the fan base and get this thing back to the point where it's not necessarily a money loser for MLSE. It may not be a money maker, but it's not a loser. But I'm worried that we're getting increasingly far away from that, and I'm really worried that this team may not be here in a few years. That's
Yeah.
not quite answering your question, but that's where I feel,
No,
right?
I know, and that's almost every conversation about the Argos at some point goes back to that. And that's something that always terrifies me. But I hold on to the hope that it's been here for as long as it has.
Yeah.
It would really take something for that to cease, and I hope it certainly hope it doesn't happen in my lifetime. Now I know we got to wrap things up shortly, Paul, but I got to ask you. Please tell me what's your favorite moment in researching this, in writing this? There's got to be one thing that stood out as just you saying, this is just spectacular.
Wow, that's it. It's funny. I've been asked similar questions to that, and I don't know I've been able to pin it down. I mean, just finding some things out that I didn't know that I thought people would go, "Wow," is pretty cool, right? My interview with Wayne Gretzky was over the phone. It wasn't, which I always prefer to be face to face if at all possible. And I the best I could arrange with Wayne was a phone conversation, and he was very good. I mean, I would have loved longer with Wayne because I don't know that he told me the full story about how his own financial involvement all went down and so on. But he did tell me something really fascinating. He talked, and it's in the book. It's a story about how it didn't come as a huge surprise, but to get it confirmed from the horse's mouth, so to speak, was, pretty early on in the 91 season. McNall basically said to Gretzky and Candy, you guys have got to talk some sense into Rocket. He's got to do his off the field job. We're counting on him to be the Gretzky of Canadian football, and he's not talking to the press. And so Gretzky and Candy had to go and have the talk with Rocket about this. And to hear Gretzky's description of it and how he and John were like staring at each other with their eyes wide open, like nobody told us about this. We didn't somehow in all the things we did, we never found out that Rocket wasn't going to be comfortable doing this stuff. So that type of revelation, and one that's a lot more minor, but one that I still get a real charge out of. I went down to Los Angeles to do a bunch of interviews down there, including with McNall and Kelvin Prinster and other players, and Chris and Jennifer Candy and so on. And one of the people I interviewed was Laura Ornest, Harry Ornest's daughter, and actually I interviewed Laura in her home, and then we got on the speakerphone. We got her sister and one of her two brothers, so have a multiple conversation there about Harry's time with the owning the Argos from 89 and 90. And so it's only a small part of the book. Harry's basically, one chapter about his 2 years as an owner, and Harry himself, who deserves his own book. He's an incredibly fascinating guy, and I had to take a lot of really good Ornest stuff out of the book because it was just slowing things down too much to get to the 91 stuff. But Laura Ornest Harry saved a lot of stuff, and Laura Ornest had all kinds of files in her possession that her late father had left, and she let me go through the files, and there was some fascinating stuff in there, including this amazing page. Harry, I guess he used a typewriter, and at one point he took the Argos, I think it was a 1989 media guide, and there was one page in the guide about, with the biography of Harry Ornest. He photocopied the biography page of Harry Ornest, stuck it into a typewriter, an old school typewriter that would actually type on, and then he sort of annotated it with some notes. And so the description, in the thing was about how he became the 8th owner of the Toronto Argonauts or something, and just a little biography about Harry Ornest. And then in the margins, he writes this thing about, it's too bad I don't have it right in front of me. I could find it. It was really, really funny. He talks about how the team was, sold on this date to Bruce McNall, Wayne Gretzky, and John Candy. Wayne was essentially a silent partner and driven into the ground in less than 1 year. And then he's got, I find these letters that a letter that he wrote to McNall in '96 saying, you still owe me like $1.3 million. And we've agreed that you're going to convert some of it to stock in Hollywood Park Racetrack. And and then, so I'm talking to the kids, I'm talking to Laura and Mike Ornest and Cindy. And I said, so do you actually know how much your dad got for the Argos? And Mike says, well, I think it was about $2 million. And at the time it was reported to be $5 million. It was a $5 million deal. McNall's in for $3 million, 60%. Gretzky's in for $1 million, and Candy's in for $1 million. And Mike says to me, I think it was $2 million. And then I said, well, and he said, I know how much he ended up with because I've still got a copy of the check. And so he sends me later a copy of the check that was paid to the estate of Harry Ornest. He was gone by then. This is back in, I think, 2001 or so. Ornest dies in 98. McNall goes to the pen in 96 or 97 and is in there for 5 or 6 years and eventually goes through the bankruptcy proceedings. And so payable to OFE Enterprises, which is Harry Ornest's surviving company, Harry's dead, is $230,000 or something like that. And it says 9.80%. So he got less than 10 cents on the dollar for what he was owed by McNall. And so, which leads me to the speculation, which I wasn't able to confirm, but I pretty firmly believe that when they made that deal, it was said to be $5 million. Gretzky wrote a check for $1 million. Candy wrote a check for $1 million. Bruce wrote a check for $0 and said, I'll owe you, Harry, I'll owe you $3 million. Never paid him. And Harry ends up getting Harry's estate ends up getting $200,000, which is 9.8 cents on the dollar. So finding that sort of stuff is just fascinating, right? To be able to actually see the check and to see the amount that was payable to him and to read his snarky comments in the margins of the media guide. There was one letter that he wrote to his lawyer when he fired a guy at the Argos, and then that there was a wrongful dismissal suit. And Harry was writing this letter complaining to the lawyer about the guy, and he was mad about the work he did, but he was really mad about the guy's terrible grammar. Like, it's just hilarious, right? So unfortunately, that didn't get into the book because the Harry chapter was too long and it was taking too long to get to 91. But finding that sort of stuff was a real blast. When I'd come out of some of those places and meetings and interviews, I go, man, this was so much fun, right?
This sounds amazing. There's so many great stories like that, and what an awesome thing for you to have been able to dig all of this stuff up, because that's
I feel
pretty
very
incredible.
fortunate. I said to almost everybody I interviewed, I've got a solemn obligation to do justice to this amazing story, because it was amazing, and the more I talked to people, the more amazing it became. And so I did. I really felt like I've got to do right by this, and I hope the people that I wrote about feel I did. I don't know. I haven't had no feedback from them other than Dunnigan and Pinball, who both wrote nice blurbs for the book and did read at least parts of it and were very, very complimentary. But I want it to be, I wrote it because I thought this story deserves to be something that will survive and be told in 50 years or 100 years, because it is so insane. It's like you would never believe it could have happened, and it deserves to live on forever. It's not just a part of Canadian football history, it's a part of Canadian history. Two of the greatest figures Canada's ever produced. The intersection of sports and culture and celebrity and business, it's got all that stuff. So I'd like to think the book will still be in print long after I'm gone, and people will still pick it up and go, holy crap, that's unbelievable.
So for any Argos fans, if there are any Argos fans that have not yet picked up this book or placed an order for this book, Paul, where's the best way for them to get hold of this book?
So the best options right now are either to order directly from the publisher, Sutherland House. If you go on Twitter, you can find them at Sutherland Books is their Twitter handle, or look up Sutherland House on the web, and they'll ship it to you for free. That's $24.95. They don't charge shipping in Canada. You can also find it in Chapters Indigo. You can either find it in stores or you can order it through Chapters Indigo. The one of the weird and actually really annoying things is that it's not for sale right now on Amazon because of some stupid bureaucratic issues happening within Amazon. And so I'm just telling people, don't even try to order it there. You're going to be waiting for a long time. Now, having said that, if you're going to Argo games, it's in the kiosks, it's in the sales kiosks at BMO. And I will put in a little plug for the team. The next game on Wednesday, October 6th, is going to be the 1991 reunion game. They're going to bring up a bunch of players for that game, bring a bunch of them back. They're going to do a pretty cool thing. I've been involved in helping them put together a video presentation, which I think is going to be pretty cool. I haven't seen it yet, but I know part of what it's going to be like, and I think it's going to be cool. And so if you want it, you can buy it at the stadium. That's $25 at the stadium. And they've got copies in at least least two of, I don't know if there's any more. There may only be the two kiosks. I'm not sure, but both the kiosks that I looked at in the last game had copies there. Not an unlimited supply, mind you. I mean, I think there might be between them, there might be 20 or so copies. So if you don't want to take a chance, go to either, look online, see if Chapters Indigo's got it in your neighborhood. Also, by the way, I always try to make a plug for the independent guys, right? Like I live in Burlington. A Different Drummer is a fantastic bookstore here in town. They've got copies. I'm hoping and assuming Ben McNally's got them in Toronto. So if you do have a local independent bookstore that you like to frequent, those guys need business even more than Chapters Indigo does. So yeah, any of those places are available, and Sutherland House as well. If anybody does have the book and wants me to sign a copy, some people like signed copies. I'm not one of these person that goes and gets signatures on my own books or that I collect, but other people like signed copies. I'm happy to meet up before or after games or at halftime and sign them. Just said, get a hold of me through Twitter at PXW13, or find me on the Argo fan forum or something and say, hey, can I see you at halftime? Happy to do that.
Paul, you've been really generous with your time today. I appreciate it so much. Thanks for being part of this podcast episode.
Well, thank you, Ben. I think you do a fantastic job, as I say, and I'm proud to be part of it. And I'm looking forward to hearing more of your analyses as we go forward, because I get a coaching perspective and an X's and O's, an X's and Argos perspective that I don't have on my own. I've watched football for a long time, and I feel I'm fairly knowledgeable about it, but there's things that I don't see as a layman that a football player or a coach would see, and I like being educated about that stuff. So keep it up, man. It's really good.
I appreciate you saying that. That's very kind. Well, that will just about do it for us on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. For Paul Woods, my name is Ben Grant, saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe.